Ooh. Okay, apologies for not starting earlier. We're in the middle of uh, page 199 of Canto 24, viewers, and sorry to not have started at the beginning. So Virgil is saying to Dante, um, exhorting him a little bit. He's not exactly chastising him. Oh, here comes Sam. I wonder what the hell are you guys doing? Hello, Sam. Well, she'll pop in a second. Um, Virgil, to cast off sloth now well behooves you, said my master then, for resting upon soft down or underneath the blanket's cloth is not how fame is won, without which one spends life to leave behind as vestige of himself on earth the sign smoke leaves on air or foam on water. So stand and overcome your panting with the soul which wins all battles, if it does not despond under its heavy body's weight. And still, a longer ladder remains for us to climb. To leave these shades behind does not fulfill all that's required. If you understand me, come, act now to profit yourself. So Dante begins to feel more resolute and they begin to go further down. And then I can't be the only person who was thinking in terms of what's coming here, Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? One of those freaky, scary, a ditch full of serpents, metamorphoses is the kind of underlying theme here. It is a little bit amazing to me the way Dante reads ancient poets, including Ovid. Yeah, here's Sam. Okay, yeah, she didn't realize the time had changed. No worries, because she didn't change in Europe. Um, Ovid is a text, obviously, given the name of his epic, the Metamorphoses. And Dante understands this in a slightly different way. For Ovid, the changes for Peleus and Thetis are physical, and in some ways, there's a tinge of the psychological. Dante's going for something much deeper. It is all of that, and of course, it is also something theological and a little medieval weird to us, um, changes of that have to do with something about the Christian mysteries. But for the moment, what we have here is just a horror scene. It's a ditch of writhing snakes, all of which were formerly sinners, and they're constantly changing. They're going kind of back and forth. So that's quite a strange thing to imagine. And among them, one speaks up, Vanni Fucci, who is like the others. They're all Florentines, of course, and he is a black Guelph. So he's from the other faction of the Guelphs, the faction that exiled Dante. Although it is curious that Dante, I think, only now is learning what's the crime that got Vanni Fucci condemned to hell. Dante doesn't seem to have been aware of it otherwise, and he tells the story about stealing sacred objects, valuable objects from a church. Um, and then finally, at the very end here, he forecasts for Dante spreading civil war and strife, which, as he says at the very end, he's only doing not to forewarn Dante particularly, as the other figures have been doing, but simply to wound him. So we're at a depth of hell where there really is a complete loss of that whole earlier world of a kind of courtesy and curiosity, and instead a kind of spiteful anger is sort of subverting everything. Any thoughts on that landscape? It's a little hard to understand. Yep. Andrew? Yeah, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Um,
Yeah.
I'm struck by, the the nastiness of Vanny, although he's a beast. But then the way that transitions into the next canto, which I'm sure you're about to talk about, but
Yeah.
it's just interesting that it really brings out the worst in Dante.
Yeah.
Um, and that's also of interest sort of after the barratry, we move into this 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 bitterness between the blacks and the whites of
Oh yeah.
Florence, the
Yeah.
how deep the
Yeah.
anger is between the two. And so
Yeah.
we've gone from Dante's personal crime, which takes us two and a half cantos, right?
Hmm.
And we really are under threat there. We then move into this next two cantos where it's now about the real enmity that exists in this community, and it's sort of, it's quite powerful, that transition. That's, I guess,
Yes.
what I would have taken from this most of all. I mean, and then of
Hmm.
course Dante's exhaustion at the beginning, then leading to this bitterness
Yeah.
is also quite striking. That
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. You remember we had Farinata as a kind of way of introducing us to this theme of political enmity and partisanship, but he was still a rather courtly, lofty figure who you remember had this look as though he held hell in great disdain, right? Well, now we're about to go to the next canto with Vanni Fucci, and the canto opens with Vanni Fucci giving the finger to God, double finger, double fig, the fig, which apparently they still do in Italy. I don't think I knew that. Um, Saying to God, take these, I aim them squarely up to you. So more, more of the serpents intertwining. Um, it's sort of odd also that the the serpents silence Fucci, and then there are all these other scenes that the commentators talk about of transmutation and metamorphosis, and there's a hint of some kind of rape, sort of male copulation. One commentator notes, and what is interesting about this is that it does not appear where you might have thought it might in that earlier canto on sodomy. Dante does not go where you expect him to go. Similarly, for example, with Paolo and Francesca, medieval art sometimes depicted lust as being punished by various kinds of very physical tortures. I was just reading an article about this, like literally, like cutting off people's testicles and so on. Dante's aim is not to do that, and so he surprises us, even though he's not, in any way a fully modern figure. But he doesn't do that. And in this case, for example, it's the same thing. There is some violent sort of rape imagery and sexual energy, and Dante's not afraid to do that. It just doesn't show up where you might expect. So this is a canto where somebody noted there were, I think, like 15 or 20 body parts named. It's embodiment in a sort of a brutal way, and this also kind of brutal shape shifting that's going on here. Um, with these figures that Dante is taking from Florence again, um, and putting through all kinds of contortions. Yeah, Andrew.
I just didn't want to miss out on that very beginning of Canto 25, when Dante, says, Pistoe, Pistoe, why haven't you
Oh,
decreed your own incineration? That's not a very nice thought about a
no, right.
city.
Yeah, yeah,
So that you dwell on earth no more, since you surpass your seed in evil doing. In all circles of hell, I saw no spirit or so arrogant to God, not even him who fell from Theban wall. And so I just Dante is really kind of pissed at this moment in a way that
yeah,
we haven't seen before, and I find that interesting as it then leads into this next section of metamorphoses and
yeah.
transmutations and resurrections and all the like.
Right,
Also,
right.
one thing on the torture that I just want to mention that I thought of, remember when we had the guys upside down?
Yeah,
in the and
yeah.
then we had the
Popes.
tar. I kept thinking like I don't think there's any torture except maybe the guy looking forward and the body going, the two going the wrong direction
Oh,
that
his head
Dante
twisted.
didn't know existed on Earth. Almost everything seems like it could have existed on Earth,
Yeah.
to some degree. I
Well,
mean,
for
obviously
example,
not this chapter, but there's
yeah,
there's there's elements of that struck me. Anyway, that was that.
there are a few that were literally from medieval practice, which is rather
Yes,
stunning to us. And that suffocation by being stuffed head down was one of them.
yes.
Uh, I've never heard of a lake of pitch. No, nobody would survive that for a moment.
But
Um,
you can imagine that they know pitch. You can imagine someone dumping someone in boiling pitch. I mean,
that
I
could
mean,
be, yeah, that could be. If it
it's
doesn't have to be a lake,
they
right? It
were
doesn't have to be a lake.
they were, and as you were saying, there were castrations and other
Yeah,
very brutal acts upon
right.
individuals.
In fact, we'll be near the bottom of hill when we have, of course, the episode with Ugolino, which is not a fast method of death, but he's going to be talking about starvation with his children, which is pretty horrendous the way the canto is structured. Yes, Daphne?
This could be just that I really don't know the text so well, but is there a reason that he is suddenly traveling outside to Libya and Ethiopia,
Ah,
the Red Sea? I
yeah.
mean, what is the significance? Is there any?
Well, he does like to put in little touches of the exotic, and we would call it, I guess, Orientalism. But more specifically, I think he's referring to the poet Lucan. And in the poet Lucan, um, the scene is Libya, and Libya is the exotic East. Egypt is this dangerous place. You know, Cleopatra was from there. Same thing for Dido in the Aeneid. She's a dubious figure because she's got this kind of devious cultural background, which we sturdy Romans need to be very wary of, sort of that kind of vibe, I think. And it adds, it's amazing. He's got 5 or 6 snakes to mention, of course, none of which we've ever heard of, or mostly. But I think it's a combination of things, maybe. Yeah, Court.
Oh, just uh, again, my anachronistic thinking. Um, the back and forth between Dante and Virgil in this section really reminded me of the commentary from two baseball commentaries that baseball uh, callers that we have in the Bay Area. One is John Miller, who has a beautiful sonorous voice and really speaks in poetry, but in detail. The way that Dante is just
Hmm.
calling balls and strikes here, but the balls and strikes that he's calling are well, he had his head on backwards, and he had a fork tail, and he's going into this detail, and then every once in a while, giving these beautiful similes, the same way
Hmm.
that
Yeah,
John Miller would do when he'd call, okay, there's a four-sided second. They almost flew there, and he'd say, well, what if Eleanor Roosevelt could fly? Did you ever think about that? Just he'd give these crazy. But then the color commentator shows up,
yeah,
who was Virgil. And Virgil explains how to get from here to there, and he gives a he says you ever remember Ovid, don't forget I just I love the just the very approachable aspect of the way that
yeah,
the commentary is going forward here. It just feels
yeah,
very. He's gotten comfortable now in hell. He's like he's just, as I say, just calling balls and strikes as he's going forward.
yep, yep. And constantly mixing it up, mixing it up.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts on 25? We're zooming along here. Hi, Sam. I didn't hear if you moved. I thought maybe your internet went out or something. I wasn't
No,
sure.
the time just didn't change here, so it was not on my radar
Sure.
and I
Yeah,
didn't
we
realize.
almost we pretty much figured
Apologies.
that out. So we jumped in without you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
good to see. All right. Okay, this is one of the most extraordinary cantos. It's one of the very 26, I mean, the false counselors and the cameo from Ulysses. a very peculiar version of Ulysses. And the opening, Dante is getting um, stressed out or something because you notice he's going to open this canto chastising Florence. And then a little later on, he says, I need to force my art to make its genius more restrained than my usual bent. It's as though he's kind of saying to himself, I don't want to go over the top here. I know I shouldn't do that. But he opens up with a complaint about really imperial ambitions. This sort of metaphor of a kind of an epic quest. Florence is some sort of giant bird flying across the landscape, and with most of its citizens in hell, which Dante says he's ashamed of. So he's partly critiquing this expansionism, which we've talked about a little bit, and he's getting pretty blunt about it. Um, he has this lovely thing on about the third tercet down. If we dream the truth near morning time, then you will feel before much time is gone what Prato and others crave for you, and come already, it would not have come too soon. And truly let it, since it must come to pass. For it will all the heavier weigh me down, the older I become. In other words, Florence's fate is what is weighing him down. Um, it's a little bit like what I was thinking of is 5th century Athens. It has this great moment. It has a kind of the zenith of its culture, the playwrights, the architecture, and then it goes into this war. It begins to get imperial. It starts up the Peloponnesian War, and this experience toward the end of the 4th century BC is what brings the house down, what collapses Athenian culture from its great height. So Dante, on a smaller scale, more compressed time frame, is doing the same thing. And now he's about to, oh, sorry, I don't want to miss the fireflies. Exactly as you're saying, Court, another beautiful aside for, would someone like to read the firefly simile, by the way, starting on page 217, and we are just up from the bottom of the page, as many as the fireflies. Anyone? Is it? Oh,
What
Isabel?
line is that?
Are you volunteering?
I could do it. I just need a second to grab my copy, which I don't
Yeah.
have immediately next to me.
Okay.
I'd be happy to do it if she can't find it.
Yeah. Have you got it, Isabel?
Yeah, which page is it again?
Yeah. Bottom of 217.
Okay.
As many as the fireflies.
Okay. Yep. Getting into position. Oh, come on. Oh, I lost a page. Okay. As many as the fireflies a peasant has seen, resting on a hill that time of year when he who lights the world least hides his face from us, and at the hour when the fly gives way to the mosquito, all down the valley's face, where perhaps he gathers grapes and tills the ground with flames that numerous was hell's 8 fosse. I forgot how to pronounce that word. Glittering. Fosse.
Yeah.
Hell's 8 fosse. Glittering as I saw when I attained the place from which its floor could be made out, and as the one avenged by bears divined that what he saw was Elijah's chariot, carried by rearing horses to heaven's domain, for with his eyes he couldn't follow it except by looking at the flame alone, like a small cloud ascending, so each flame moves along the ditch's gullet with not one showing its plunder, though every flame contrives to seal away a sinner.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Anybody have a thought on what that simile is doing before we quickly get to Ulysses here? Fireflies, what does that have to do with anything? Any thoughts? I'll share one quick note I picked up from somewhere. It suggests that there's a multitude of these centers. There are many of them, and they are little insignificant figures. So Dante's trying to sort of suggest that there's something very small about this. Although, as you know, we're about to encounter a large figure among them who, as he speaks, will get bigger and bigger. And this is Ulysses, and it is Dante's version of Ulysses, kind of borrowed from several different places. And the reason I think Dante is so um, focused on this encounter, and the reason it turns into such a remarkable uh, self-presentation, is that Dante himself, as you probably have picked up, had a great passion to know. You know, he lived at a time when, in some ways, it was possible to have universal knowledge. Now, what could that possibly mean? In other words, Dante knew a certain amount about the science of the day. He knew some theology. He knew a great deal of literature and all the rest of it. So it's kind of the great ambition of a figure later like maybe Goethe, the last of, the universal men. And after all, the term university, in some ways, was about the universe of knowledge. All knowledge was supposed to be comprehended within it, and so on. So Dante definitely has a overvaulting ambition of that kind, and he also knows that there's something problematic about it. And as he wants to speak to this classical figure coming out of the flame, he lets Virgil take the microphone because, kind of interestingly, Virgil, after all, as an epic poet, is a more suitable figure to speak to a character in his poems, Ulysses, as opposed to Dante, a contemporary Italian. Andrew?
Yeah, I was also thinking the firefly simile is also very calming after
Huh.
after what's come before.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of violence and a lot of very
Yes.
unusual, but for most people, I think looking out over a landscape with fireflies, it's actually quite beautiful. It's
True.
not typically frightening or in any way, intimidating. So this transition, I found this interesting that he doesn't really. I feel he has, sort of again a lot of pity for Ulysses, and but we're not in a
Mhm.
zone of horror or terror or fear in the
No,
same way
right.
we have been.
Yeah. It's as though we're suddenly back in this kind of more noble, elevated atmosphere from earlier in the poem in order that Ulysses can make this speech, which is kind of curious. You know, he had kind of a double reputation. He was the uh, guileful deviser of the Trojan horse, and he was part of all that. And so in the text, you'll see there's several crimes. He created a deception around Achilles and stole the palladium, a sacred object. So on the other hand, um, he is he has this lust for learning. So even though Dante could not read Greek, he knew about Ulysses through the Latin poets. And so there's a new story here, really, that Dante is creating as an adventurer for experience. Now you can almost begin to feel the vibe of like the age of exploration is probably not too far away. There were two, I think there were, let me check my notes here. There were Genoese. There were two brothers, the Vivaldi brothers, that in 1291 attempted to sail beyond the known world, beyond the pillars of Gibraltar, which was a symbolic landmark. They disappeared without a trace. So nothing unusual about that in medieval or even later sailing, but there was just something about the idea that if you knew where the boundaries were, why would you transgress the boundaries and do this dangerous thing? So it's something about a lust for adventure. And Dante seems in some ways to identify with that kind of intellectual ambition. Any thoughts on that?
I just couldn't help but wonder if Elias, if you had a bumper sticker on your car with flames on it that said um, Elias's chariot. I was just curious.
Elijah's chariot. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I should think about that. You're right.
yeah.
Johanna.
Yes, one thing I would like to note is that in some ways, this is very paradoxical in the way that Ulysses is presented in this canto because Virgil has no respect in his Aeneid for Ulysses's
Yes.
great crime, and that is a murder. So
Yeah.
it's just interesting that he would be the one, would be probably the best spokesperson to talk about this. I remember from the Aeneid, there's a line that he says, he calls Ulysses the ringleader of atrocity.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, this is it, and here I think Dante's, he's struggling with how to think about Ulysses. On one hand, he's a great warrior. He is beguiling, and and that has helped him to be
Yeah.
the great warrior that he is. However, his guide and master doesn't see it that way. At least at some level, he doesn't see it that way. So, and murder is this atrocity, as he calls it in the Aeneid, is I think, is very troublesome. So you have these, I think there's tension
Yes,
um,
definitely.
in the way that this is presented in this particular content. He calls
That's
him, this ringleader. This is from, I'm reading from the Aeneid, that the ringleader of atrocity. And he says that he is like the something about Zeus, the wind of Zeus, wind kind of Zeus. And
Hmm.
so you've got this ambiguity, and I
Yes.
think that's
That's
interesting.
good. That's good. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And the other thing is he's on the wrong side for Dante. Dante's on the Trojan side, not on the Greek side, in terms of the way he thinks of the ancestry of the Italian people. So there's that in the background. And still, there's something intriguing for him about Ulysses. Daphne?
In one commentary by Prue Shaw,
Yes, she's great.
Homer's that in the version of Ulysses that Dante knew,
Hmm.
did not tell of Dante's death. So Dante actually didn't know the end of Dante's fate.
Of,
Um,
of
she says,
Ulysses' fate?
so in Homer, she says, in Homer's Odyssey, Ulysses returns to Penelope, to
Oh,
Penelope, but the
yes,
medieval accounts that Dante knew did not tell of his death.
that's right.
So there is a sort of inquiry as to what actually happened to him. Is that something?
Interesting. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, so he wouldn't have known the happy ending. There would just be this mystery. Um, so because in this period, they had some classical text, no Greek text, not yet for 100 years. So sometimes they have fragments of information. Um, so also, um, Virgil sort of speaks to Ulysses to start this conversation. And he does it in this kind of high style, as though he is kind of mimicking Latin, kind of solemn. And then Ulysses tells this story and gives a little speech to his men. And this is, by the way, a case of fraudulence, arguably. And that is, he's convincing the men to go with him on this voyage, which, is surely going to be perilous. Um, and the question is, is this admirable or is this simply bad advice that's going to lead to perdition? Um, Andrew reminded me that Tennyson, many of you will know the great poem by Tennyson called Ulysses. It was taken up, this is just kind of a weird random thing, by the Kennedy family, Jackie Kennedy and JFK and Robert Kennedy, I think, all at different times, quoted the lines toward the end of the poem that go, "We are not now that strength which in old days moved heaven and moved earth and heaven. That which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield."
I I
Right.
can't I think that was a famous poem to be memorized
Yeah,
by many people in the 20th century. I don't know about the 21st. So
school
that
kids.
might have been one of the
Yeah.
ways that the Kennedys came upon it, being forced to memorize it. Um,
This has got something to do with Camelot,
yeah,
the whole I mean
yeah.
they did like the poem. Yes, they did. And
Yeah.
they RFK recited it and
I
Jackie wrote it out for JFK to recite on a special event. But
I wanted to just mention before we have to go, I think we have to go soon, is in
yeah.
130 or so, 120 in the Pinsky. There's a line there that made me think of Edgar Allan Poe, actually, and I'll tell you why, where it says, I would have found them difficult to restrain, turning our stern towards the morning light. We made wings of our oars
Hmm.
in an insane flight. And I don't know if you guys know the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym, but it starts in Lower Manhattan during a great storm where two guys have gotten drunk, and one of them wakes up apparently completely sober and convinces his friend that they should get out on their boat
Yeah.
and sail into
Yeah.
this tempestuous storm. And it's only once they've sailed a little bit that the one guy, the narrator, realizes that the man whose idea this was is completely drunk and can't actually manage
Huh, huh.
the boat at all, and thus a tragedy ensues. And then the story really begins to go. But it's this notion of an insane flight that made me think that, well, I wonder if what Poe knew about Dante. And it turns out he knew a lot about Dante
Oh, really?
and could quote it and translated it in
Huh.
part, I mean, to friends. So I thought that was just sort of an interesting historical connection, this notion of an insane flight.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it
This
would have been insane
Moby Dick
to,
in a way, right?
yeah, another insane
Mayhem.
flight,
Yeah.
although much longer, much slower unfolding.
Yeah,
Sorry. Who's that?
nothing. I was just agreeing. I was chuckling.
Oh, okay. Um, so that's sort of the ambiguity of the speech. The speech, by the way, is famous in Italian culture. You can easily see why, um, from the kind of grandiose language. I'll just read a little bit of it. Um, let's see. So little is the vigil we see remain still for our senses, that you should not choose to deny it the experience behind the sun, leading us onward of the world which has no people in it. Consider well your seed, your origins. You were not born to live as a mere brute does, but for the pursuit of knowledge and the good. And so that revs up all the crew. They get excited and they're going to go ahead. Um, so he has this ardor to see and to know. And I'll just say quickly, and I'm going to have to jump. There was some kind of a notion of a medieval vice called curiositas, which is really a strange notion. Um, but what it amounts to, I mean, the way we could understand it is that it um, it isn't sane or moral to think that you must know everything, that some knowledge ought to be forbidden. So you can take that in kind of an obscurantist way. But another way is you could say, well, maybe the guys working on the atom bomb should have thought about this. Or you can imagine other areas where, well, how about constraint of technology? Is there constraint of technology anywhere? Has there ever been? Or are we just compelled by curiositas as well as funding to keep that enterprise going? I ask merely out of curiosity. Any thoughts? I can tell Court's chewing that over.
Well,
Well, you get,
the theory with the bomb was once they'd figured out that there was a neutron, it was inevitable. So,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, once they realized what they had at hand,
Yes.
it's very hard to, and I guess we have the same thing with AI.
Yeah. Misusing of mental powers and uh, the waste of human greatness in that way. Yes, Mary?
that's just come up this week in the negotiations between
Yeah,
the
literally,
Department of Defense and
literally.
Anthropic in terms of limiting the use
That's right.
of AI and
That's
not
right.
going into an area of mass surveillance and autonomous killing.
Very good. I guess
So
I may have had that in the back of my mind. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
Ben, there's one school of thought that it was like it's abhorrent. It's like it's immoral that you would consider limiting AI in any way, and that
Correct.
so very
Yep.
much it very much buys into that curiositas notion.
Yep. Anybody else? I'm just about to have to jump. Let's see. Sam, I better make you host before I do that. Let's see. How can I? Okay, I'm trying and it's not. One sec. Here we are.
Elias, are
Now you're
you
good.
recording to your computer or to the cloud?
I'm recording locally, but I'll send it to you. I'll put it up in on Google Drive, and then you can move it from there if you want,
Okay,
unless there's another way.
I just want to note, I'm not sure if recording will continue once you jump off the call in
Oh,
that case.
dang.
So that's fine. I just want to note it for anybody who's listening to the playback.
You're right. Thanks for pointing that out. Okay.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Glad we got it together. See you next time. Ciao.